Doodlebud here. Today we're talking about this seriously cool 3D printed pen, and you know it's going to be a good episode because I already have ink on my finger and I haven't even started. So this is the latest pen by Platypus Pens. They're out of Australia, as you can see here, run by Michael Liu. This is the Model 20. He has sent me some of his other pens before that he's 3D printed as well, and I thought they were absolutely amazing. There we go, got a little focus now. Does a phenomenal job. The pens write wonderfully, all sorts of colors and patterns and options. But he's been hard at work, and I got to tell you, today's video might be a little more engineering even than normal, because there is an enormous amount of work that went into this pen, and he even came up with a 3D printing idea that's a feature now in some 3D printing software. And I even have my laptop out today because I got to show you some of these things he's done. But first, let's just get into the basics. So here you go. This is a fairly large size pen. For a super quick size comparison, this is a Jinhao X159, the Platypus Model 20, and this is a TWSBI VAC 700. And here they are uncapped, so you can see it's quite long. Now on his previous models, when it came to filling, the filling system he went with was just a standard international cartridge converter setup. Everyone knows it. It works great. But on this pen, he did something totally different. He has 3D printed his own filling system on here, which is really cool. Let's show you that here in just a moment. Quick little tour. I'll get into all the details on here, how he's 3D printing this. There's some little hidden secrets you see, which is really neat. Of course, there'll be different colors and all sorts of stuff available. Check out his website for details. Here we have a metal clip on here. I think the pen cap comes off in one turn, if I remember. Yes, exactly one turn. So I super appreciate that. Here's a good look at the pen. Nice little tapered section there. And yeah, just to get all these different colors, these are filaments, different filaments you have to do. So there's a lot of detail to put a pen together to have all those attractive features in it. Let me unscrew this and show you what he's done. So this is a custom bladder that he's printed as well. He has a blog post. He sort of pre-shared it with me, so I think it'll be up on his website maybe by the time I do this video or very shortly after. There's a lot of details in here. Lots of different materials had to be used to print this pen. I think this is TPU. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he sent me a lot of correspondence. There'll be all sorts of details I'll give you. So this is flexible and it gets compressed. I'm going to show you that in a minute. It's full of ink. So you know, I'm not going to do it right now or it's ink everywhere, but it also serves as sort of an ink window. You can see into the pen. This part here, there's a built-in ink window in there and it goes down into the section. So you have a 3D printed ink window. So you can see that from the outside. It's a small little one. It's not as clear as your regular ones that you get when you're dealing with like injection molding. Of course it won't be, but you can actually see your ink level. But yeah, pop it off. You can see it as well. You can compress this for cleaning. I'm going to show you that later on in the video. And this part alone, because you want to make sure this was going to work and never fail, he's done 100,000 cycles on this filling system. There's a screw mechanism on here. You have a blind cap and you turn it and this compresses that ink bladder that's there. And that's how it fills. You're going from one-handed thread to the other-handed thread all in one mechanism, which is just amazing. There's so much work that went into this. The nib on here is a number 6 size nib. This is a Schmidt nib and it also features an ebonite feed. So that's super cool. And this thing writes super smooth. I asked him immediately because the moment I wrote with what I just went, whoa, this is really, really good. Great wetness and super smooth. I looked at the nib right away. I thought this is probably tuned. And yeah, so he checks every single pen, not just the ones he sends out for review, but every nib before it sends out. He inspects them. Sometimes they're perfect out of the box. Sometimes you need to tune them and adjust them. And he does that on every single pen. Let's quickly get you a weight. So filled up with ink, we got about 30 grams, just a little over 30 grams. That's a nice weight. I think that's pretty accommodative to everybody. And then the pen itself, just over 18 grams. His other models were designed to post, but with this model, it's not. So it doesn't post. I don't think that's a problem at all. It's plenty large. I would never actually post this pen. Even if it posted super deep, it would be too big anyways. I figure I'll do the writing sample right now before I get into the really technical stuff for those folks who don't want to see the really technical stuff. I also had a quick look and noticed the ink level actually is running low. I didn't notice it on the camera, I just was getting ready to do the writing sample here. I noticed actually the ink window is showing me, if I can focus. There we go. The ink window showing me there's not much ink, and there's a little breather tube that you can see that goes inside of here. So I got to refill this. Let's show you how this works. Okay, so we're going to turn that blind cap like so. Okay, we're going to put it into the ink, and then we're going to turn it down. And so you can see it's going to compress that bladder, and it'll actually pop back up because it's squeezing the bladder. So you can do one time, or you can do it a few times. I'll give it one more go. There we go. So we're done now, and then we're going to turn this the other way, and it's going to tighten the knob back down onto the body. There's some really, really cool 3D printed parts inside of this pen. And now you can see on the ink window, it's much, much darker. And if we go in here, your little reservoir in there, I didn't fully get super topped up, but you can see it's a lot darker on there now. You can see the ink sloshing around inside of there. The number one thing a pen must do is write well, and all the cool stuff I'm about to go into would matter if the pen doesn't write nicely, but the pen writes wonderfully. This nib is super smooth, extremely wet. It is one of the smoothest pens I've written with. He's done a fantastic job. The ebonite feed is providing the flow coming from this really cool ink reservoir. So it passes the number one test, which how does the pen write? And it writes wonderfully. Now let's get into my sort of fun stuff, and it's the technical side of things. To do that, I have another 3D printed item here as a reference. This is a grip that I use for arm wrestling training. It puts a lot of pressure on your fingertips. There's a bar that goes through. You hook this up to your weights, and this thing's trying to open your hand up. And so this is a grip I 3D printed for arm wrestling. Works great. Now, whenever you print something, I'm going to show you the computer in a second. Just how the printer works, it goes around each time, and then the nozzle goes up a little bit. That's all these little layers. I'm using my print as an example because it's not a very good print. But you can see all those little layers, and there's going to be a start and a stop point. And inside of this grip here, you can see there's something called a seam. That right down in there. So it's essentially a bit of a defect. There we go. That's much better. And you can see it's much worse. So it's essentially a little defect due to the nature of how the 3D printer works. So you'd like to get rid of that. There's a few ways to do that. Let me show you what it looks like in software. Okay, so I'm in my software on my laptop. This is something called Fusion 360, and here is the object that was designed, and this thing is now ready to 3D print. So now what you do is you open another piece of software called a slicer, and this is a three-dimensional cube of the print volume within my printer. And I dropped that same file into there. So we're not breaking any laws, it can fit. And then we're gonna slice this. And on the side here, there's all sorts of parameters. We're not gonna get into a 3D printing course today, but how you want this thing to 3D print essentially, how thick your layers are gonna be, all this type of stuff. And so what we have now, if I hit the preview button, we can go in and take a look at how this object is actually gonna 3D print. And so what you see happening now, that's what the nozzle will be doing as it 3D prints this. And the layers on the outside are super important because that's the layer you're going to see. And there's always going to be that little seam. You can try to hide it with different settings, but it's still going to be there. And even with all these settings that you can adjust here, just for this print, you still can't fully control where the nozzle is going to be at any time and make sure it's going to do exactly what you want to do. So what Michael did at Platypus Pens is he got rid of the slicer software and even got rid of the design software. And all that he does is generate this stuff, which is what's called G-code. These are the instructions that are sent, line by line, position by position, to the 3D printer telling it exactly what to do. And in order to make this pen, he had to have that level of control. He needed to tell the nozzle exactly where to be so it can come out looking exactly like he wants and has all the tiny little details. For example, this pattern. Now on his previous pens, to get rid of that seam issue that I was showing you, he printed in something called vase mode, where it will just start and do one continuous spiral all the way up till you're finished. Now, the problem with that is you can't have much thickness in the layers, so he would laminate the pens. He would print separate parts and make a sandwich, and they were quite good and strong. But he abandoned that altogether because he still wanted to be able to do more stuff. So this is a problem he had to overcome, and he figured out a solution. And let me tell you how this works. On a regular 3D print, let's say this is the starting point. The printer nozzle will go along, lay that line. In this case, we're doing a tube, so it's going to loop all the way around, come back to the starting point, join up, and then you bump up. And then you start another one. And you go all the way around, and you go there again. And so this is how that seam is formed with a standard slicing in 3D printing. Michael got inspiration from some woodworking techniques where it's called a scarf joint, where you sort of layer them on top of each other. You ramp up, so it goes around again, and now it goes over top. It sort of ramps up, and you can do that to hide your seam. So this is a really, really cool technique, and now this has been integrated. There's several different slicing programs out there. One of them is called Orca, and he reached out to them, showed them the technique. They were so impressed, they programmed that feature into that slicer software, so other people can now use it too. So like I said earlier, just the design and making of this pen led to a feature now in slicing software to improve prints depending on what you're trying to do. However, that was still not good enough because he wanted full control of where that seam was going to start and stop, and it also becomes really important when you're doing your threads. Now, when it comes to this pattern, it's actually a very smart pattern because all these little dimples that you see and change on here, that could be a start or stopping position of the nozzle. But because you essentially put this type of pattern into the pen, you're really, really camouflaging it. But when it comes to your threads and slicer software, you can't guarantee where the nozzle will be at any time. So that's where the manual coding, putting in G-code. Now, he uses software to generate the G-code to save him a bunch of time because it is thousands upon thousands of lines of code. He can now ensure he will directly tell the nozzle where to start and where to stop on each layer. So ideally, you'd want one of those blips that happens on the print to be down there at the very bottom of the thread. You don't want it to be on the sides on the ramp there, because that would impede thread performance. So now on every single layer, he can control that. So he can place that nozzle exactly where he wants it to be on any layer, but it really comes into play when it comes to your threads. And when you're designing a pen like this, it has its own threads to put it together, but your own filling system that's in here, and this is a really, really critical part, you want to be able to really control those threads on there. And to ensure these parts could last a very long time, because they are 3D printed, sometimes they can be problematic, aren't as durable. He actually cycle tested this filling system 100,000 times. So that would be the turning of the blind cap, and then plunging this 5 times, and then that'd be like a full cycle. So he had to do that 20,000 times. So 20,000 times engaging this first, and then times that by 5. So 100,000 plunges of this little ink reservoir. And the thing still held up fine after all that wear and tear on the threads and the ink reservoir itself. Now, I would expect that level of testing from manufacturers like, say, Pilot or Lamy. I mean, yeah, they're going to do that type of stuff. But for a solo operation down in Australia with a 3D printer, this is what one person is doing all themselves. They are designing this purely through generating G-code, creating new methods to hide seams and start new layers within your 3D slicing software, and also controlling it manually. And then also, playing with all the materials that are there to have a very new and unique filling system. I don't want to say 100% new because it is similar to some older systems, but especially we haven't seen this forever. And with new materials and a new way of making this, putting this all together and then testing this system 100,000 times to ensure all the parts are going to hold up. And this thing will outlive you, from a parts perspective. And then top it off with a nicely tuned nib that's nice and wet, and it writes wonderfully. You can see why I'm blown away by the level of detail that went in to one person deciding to 3D print a pen. I might as well show you how it really works. So when you turn this down, it'll spring back, because what's happening is you're essentially twisting that ink sac, and then it springs back to open it because it's acting essentially like a spring. So this is getting twisted like this, sort of like wringing out a paper towel. And so that's all the testing he did on that to make sure that this wasn't going to fail. At the top here, you can see like this sort of little tooth pattern. Let me show you what's on the inside. As you're turning the mechanism on the back, that blind cap, it drives that little foot down. It's connected with a screw and a nut. Those are metal. And so that is going to grab into here. It has a little tooth pattern. It's like a lead screw that he has on the inside. And then that's going to twist it just like that. So here's the cleaning. And what you can do is just squeeze the bladder manually to make it really, really quick. And you can squirt the dirty water into there, and away you go. Now you could do this I'd be doing this under the sink or something like that, but you can just squeeze it really quick back and forth, and I can already see how clear the ink window's getting. So it makes it actually quite quick and easy to clean out the pen. Here's a look of it after cleaning. Now he did say over time it will stain. It's just the nature of the material. It's not like some other plastics, and you can't really use harsh chemicals on here, so expect some discoloration over time. I'm going to kind of stop it there because there is so much more detail I could get into, but I'll let you explore if you go to platypuspens.com. And Michael is going to have a blog post. It might already be up, but it might be up very, very soon. And he'll go through all the different parts that are in here, how it's assembled. There is so much that goes into this pen. So I'll let Michael give accurate, because I'll probably say it a little bit wrong or miss a detail that is critical. So check out his website for the details. How you order it, you got to get in touch with him on there as well. This is listing for 250 Australian dollars, which works out to about 230 Canadian, or just under 170 or so US. I think for everything, I mean, the R&D and testing alone that went into this, like, he's going to have to sell a good number of these to just recoup all of that. I think this is extremely well priced when you consider what had to be done and the amount of work it takes to put this together. There's all these different materials. They'll have to be printed individually, then assembled. Parts have to get glued together to do this. And the testing, everything. I'm blown away by this. And you're getting a tuned nib with an ebonite feed, and it looks pretty damn cool. So I encourage you, if this is something that you'd be interested in, reach out to Michael. His information is here. It'll be down in the description. It's also on his website. And all I can say is, wow, you really intimidate me when it comes to 3D printing. I still have some other projects I'm doing. But yeah, this blew my mind. I had an inkling of some of the stuff he was doing because I was working on some design and some testing, and I couldn't get anything near to what he's doing. And then he told me, well, you sort of have to ditch your CAD software and the slicer altogether. And then I realized, oh, I know what you're doing now. And it's pretty damn cool. So there we go. We'll leave it there. I'll try to chat with you down there. Hit thumbs up, hit comment. Until then, we'll catch you next time.